over. The tide is high, but I'm moving on. I wanna be your number one. The tide is high, but I'm moving on. I wanna be your number
Welcome to the Fourth Branch program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening. Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch program, the place for common sense. Welcome to a very special edition of the program. Today we continue the conversation about a candidate in the Democrat side who tried to unseat Donald Trump from the Oval Office. We will also touch today on who in the Republican side getting ready to challenge Donald Trump for the nomination. We will also take a quick look at why there continues to be a record deficit in the Republican Party. That and much more as we return. I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program, inviting you to join me every Saturday at 10:30 a.m. and every weekday at 2 p.m. for discussions of social political issues and to dissect the meaning and the importance of current events as well as to understand topics of legislations. The Fourth Branch Project is not associated with any political party, and we at the Fourth Branch do not have any political agenda or aspiration. Our ultimate objective is to work towards achieving a more perfect union by removing ignorance, the biggest obstacle to our democracy. Stay with us. We will be right back. Today we will take a look at one other candidate in the Democrat side, that's John Delaney. For the past few days, we have been featuring those stars in the Democrat Party. We talked about Andrew Young. We already featured Jay Inslee. And yesterday we did feature John Hickenlooper. Today we are going to talk a little bit about John Delaney. But before we get to John, let's take a quick look at why we actually ought to present to you options for the 2020 presidential election. You see, since the existence of the Republic, the very structure of our government requires that every 4 years we go to the poll and we cast our vote to put someone in the Oval Office. And of course, our system of government trusts that we, the people, will make the right choice. Although politics is never a straightforward process, but in the beginning it was more or less sure that the citizen of the country would make choices that are beneficial to not just a political party, but beneficial to the majority. Besides, people, not just here in the United States, used to have more decency. They used to be more caring. They used to have more concern for their neighbors, for their neighbors' predicament. They used to be human. But as time goes on, it seems that our society has been morally, ethically deficient, suffered of deficiency, some more so than others. As such, the country is in a predicament that a couple of decades ago we used to complain about big divide. We used to complain about the state of affairs in the country, state of affairs in politics. But no one ever imagined that we would get to a point in which we would have a government, we would have a president who would go about destroying every aspect of the institution which have thus far made the United States the envy of the world. If you think about it for just 1 second, who does it benefit to support an individual, one individual, determined to destroy the fabric of our government, to destroy the very Constitution which has made the United States the envy of the world? Other countries have tried to emulate what we have here. And it was never about a particular president. It was always about the system of government that we have. It was about the structure of government that we have. And every president has always tried as best as possible to abide by the rule, to uphold the Constitution. And no matter how much disagreement, how many disagreement between among the politicians, it always boils down to one simple factor. Everyone works towards making America better until the 2016 Now, you may want to turn a blind eye, or you may want to shrug off that the country is okay. But if you sit down and think about what has been going on and how our country has been plummeting in standing in the world, as I mentioned yesterday, now the United States of America is among the corrupt governments in the world. Enough shrug off. Now, the reason that we get to this point, as I mentioned, is because the framers of the Constitution did put a lot of faith in the people, did put a lot of trust in the people. They did imagine, despite having put a lot of safeguard in our government, for instance, the structure that we have, 3 separate equal branches of government, that was a lot of safeguard in order to prevent the country from falling to where it's at today. But the framers of the Constitution could not anticipate, could not foresee 2 major flaws, to no fault of the framers of the Constitution. One, that we would have a political party which would fully, completely relinquish their legislative duty. 2, we would have people who do not know any better and would continue to support those same legislators, helping them to continue the erosion of our democracy. We cannot blame the framers of the Constitution because there is no way in the world that they could have possibly foresee, anticipate, or predict that we would have those 2 problems at the same time. Legislators who do not care as long as they can work to keep their job, no matter what it takes, to the detriment of the country, be the Constitution of the United States be damned, if that guarantees they're gonna keep their job. Of course, the framers of the Constitution could not possibly foresee that the people, we the people, we would get to a point where we do not care about what happened to our country. And that's exactly where we are at today. That both the legislators and the constituent in the Republican Party completely turned their back to the United States. At all costs, they want their party to be in power. At all costs, they want their legislators to be in Washington. At all costs, they want those legislators to protect an individual who is not worth protecting, an individual who has up to this point destroyed every aspect of our government, not to make it any better, because we sin. It doesn't matter whether you understand how government works, but you can see that the very institutions that have made America the envy of the world are being completely destroyed. And while you may cheer the idea as if this is the best thing that has happened, the rest of the world advancing and taking advantage of our weaknesses, taking advantage of the weaknesses in our institution. It is mind-boggling, but this is the predicament the country is in. Although the 2020 presidential election is really quite a few months into the future, 18, 19 months, there is already great interest in the race. There has not been even a single debate, and yet the amount of interest, the amount of involvement in the race is staggering. It's almost as if the election is right around the corner, and there is a reason for that. Irrespective of what Republican legislators and Republican constituents may think, there is always a sector in the country who continues to believe that the country is worth preserving, the country is worth protecting, and the Constitution is worth upholding. It is one thing to simply say you love the country. It is one thing to simply say you want to protect the Constitution. But it is a whole different ballgame when it comes time for those same individuals to actually do what is required, what is necessary in order to keep our country the envy of the world, to uphold the Constitution, to abide by the rule of law, and to make certain that whoever does not pay a price, because it's way much better, much more important to preserve our country than to support an individual. As such, the Democrats who are fighting, racing to become the nominee in order to take on the Republican Party should not be considered as another party or a candidate for another party. And whoever becomes the nominee should receive the full support of those who are patriots. Republicans and Democrats should receive the full support of all Americans who are concerned about the future of the country, should receive the full support of all Americans who want to reinstate decency in the Oval Office. It is in this spirit that today we continue the conversation and featuring another candidate, this time John Delaney. And the purpose is to get you acquainted with each individual, to find out what they stand for, what they would do, what their priorities are, and which of those candidates you would want to become the next president of the United States in 2020.
After reading several books based on presidents and on Obama specifically, I found that they're typically partisan. The Obama legacy targets the heart of the issue by giving credit to the president where it's due, but definitely coming down hard on Obama on his bigger failures, like handling the Syrian crisis.
If you are in college, going to college, you are an educator, a faculty member, or someone with interest in government or politics, The Obama Legacy is definitely a book to read.
My professor recommended The Obama Legacy.
A friend actually recommended The Obama Legacy.
I would highly recommend this book for anyone, whether for academic use or leisure reading.
I would recommend this book to anyone out there searching for an impartial and unbiased look into Barack Obama's tenure as president.
I would definitely recommend this book as a good read for both liberals and conservatives.
Donald Trump is wrong to call the media the enemy of the people. Throughout history, dictators, authoritarians have always tried to delegitimize the media in order to get away with corruption, scandal, and yes, even abuse. Adolf Hitler did exactly the same thing in 1933, accusing the media of fabrication. Journalists are not in the business of fairness. Our only business, is to be objective. It is our duty to hold Trump and every administration accountable. Today, it is urgent. It is necessary. It is critical. Our very freedom depends on it. Who is John Delaney? John Delaney was a representative representing the 6th District of Maryland, January 2013 to January 2019. Now, I should point out that John voluntarily decided not to seek re-election because he wanted to focus on the presidential bid. So he did not. He wasn't defeated. He simply decided not to seek re-election. John was born in Woodridge, New Jersey, on April 16, 1963, just a few days shy of his birthday. So if you think about me doing a surprise gift to John, well, the time is close by. He is married to April McLean, and since 1990. Together they have 4 children. John did go to Columbia University, where he got a Bachelor of Science, and he continued in his education at Georgetown University, where he also obtained a Juris Doctor degree. Now, John was a businessman. He did have, I believe, two companies that were traded in Wall Street, in the stock market. And with not NASDAQ, New York Stock Exchange. And in 2004, John did win the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year award. In 1993, he co-founded a company by the name of Healthcare Financial Partners, and the purpose was to provide loans to small healthcare service providers, especially those that did not have any way of providing the banks much collateral or much document to guarantee the loan that they sought to get from the bank. So John saw an opportunity there, and he co-founded the Healthcare Financial Partners Institution. He did also in 2000 co-founded a company called Capital Source. That's a commercial lender which is headquartered in Maryland. That particular company provided loan to smaller size businesses. Now in 2010, John, as CEO, was awarded a Bank Enterprise Award from the Community Development Financial Institution Fund by the U.S. Treasury Department for this type of initiative that he took to invest in low-income and economically distressed community. And in 2005, John was named one of Washingtonian magazine best places to work for because of the culture and the type of benefit that his company offered. Now, it is a good thing to know about John, that it's a good place to work. People interviewed there say, great place to work. This is not an award that's just given to just about any company. There are a number of criteria that are looked at before that type of award is provided to the founder of that company, John actually is a baby in politics. He only has 6 years experience, just 6 years. That's not a lot of time, but that is not to that's not anything against John, because as we know that a lot of individuals, including the current president of the United States, did not have much experience in politics when they decided to bid for the presidency of the United States. Now, last time I mentioned something I wish to correct when I talked, I believe, was about Andrew Young. When I featured Andrew Young, I mentioned that he was the first to jump into the bandwagon as candidate for the presidency of the United States. It so happened that actually was not accurate. It is John Delaney who was the first individual to say that he would be seeking the presidency of the United States. In fact, he made that announcement since July of 2017. So he was on record the first Democrat who made the announcement that he would be seeking the presidency of the United States. And at that time, since that time actually, he has been literally crisscrossing the country and trying to make certain that he has a good performance. According to record, as a matter of fact, John visited every county in Iowa. Yes, you heard correctly. The first person who did that was Rick Santorum when he ran, I believe was in 2012, where he decided to visit every single county in Iowa, and it paid off. At least it did pay off for Rick Santorum. So John Delaney, having declared his intention to bid for the presidency of the United States, did the same thing. Now, we don't know if that's going to bring him the same result, because it was a while when he did that. It was in July of 2017, contrary to Rick Santorum, who actually did visit every county at the time that the election, the primary, was closed by. It was a little bit fresh in those individuals' head, and it benefited Rick Santorum. Now, whether that is dividend for John remains to be seen. As I mentioned, even up to today, we have not even had the first debate in the Democrat side. The first debate is slated for June in Florida. Now, what makes John Delaney a candidate to consider? Now, here's his big idea. Now, as I mentioned before, each candidate who vies for the presidency of the United States, and that's not just a Democrat thing, it is generally speaking that every candidate always embrace some sort of idea, a topic that they consider important, they consider priority, that they would try to push that as their main topic whenever that they go to talk to prospective voters, to talk to constituents, to talk to the country, in debates and so on and so forth. That would be their main focus. Now, of course, all candidates will talk about all different topics. Now, there is something to say about that as well, as to the pros and the cons of doing that. But that's something we'll come back to after we're done with featuring the candidate. Now, I should also mention that when we first started this process, we provided a list of candidates, Democrat candidate that is, bidding for the presidency of the United States. Now, since we've done that, there been two more candidates who threw their hats into the ring. One is Rick, I don't recall the last name anymore, but Tim Ryan first. That was Tim Ryan, who threw his hat into the ring. I believe it was on April 2nd. And we have Eric Swalwell, who later, a couple of days later, also decided that he would want to become the president of the United States, the next president of the United States. So the list of candidates vying for the Oval Office is growing. Now, I also must point out that there is at least, as of date, one candidate, that's the former governor of Massachusetts, William Weld, who already put the word out that he will offer a challenge to Donald Trump for the nomination in the Republican Party. And it seems that there is also a possibility there may be another individual, or even a couple of them. Currently, the individual in question is John Kasich, who has been mulling the idea of jumping in. And a couple of days ago, I believe, it could have been this morning, as a matter of fact, getting to think about it, Jeb Bush suggests that there should be a challenge, there should be someone else vying for the nomination in the Republican Party. So it remains to be seen how many others would do that. There was even rumors that Jeff Flake, you remember Jeff Flake, a senator from Arizona, the one that actually was on the spotlight because he would not vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh until they did some sort of investigation. Remember that? Well, that guy. In any event, it seems that up to this point we don't know exactly how the whole thing is gonna evolve, because there is a possibility that for the first time that an incumbent president may have to defend his position against members of his own party. So it may become really quite interesting. Now, there is also another interesting tidbit to this whole evolution in this 2020 presidential race. I am currently considering looking at the possibility that Donald Trump may not even seek re-election. Yes, you heard correctly. That's something we'll come back to in another time. If we even looking currently writing an article presenting the various side of this conversation. Now back to John Delaney. Now, what is John Delaney's big idea? Why should you consider him? What does he have to offer? Well, John Delaney seems to have the following as his big idea that he's going to promote during the time he will be crisscrossing the country asking for your vote. He wants to build a public and private international coalition against China's intellectual property theft, and he wants to compete against China in Asia. Well, that is Mr. Delaney's big idea, and he wants to do that with a TPP style trade deal. Now, what I just said may just go right over your head, and that's also another aspect of this conversation during the time that once we're done featuring those candidates bidding for the presidency of the United States, it is also another aspect, especially on the Democrat side, that we see a pattern that we will address and which is also very important. And what exactly are we talking about? We noticed that a lot of Democrat candidates vying for the presidency of the United States, they come up with what we call a big idea, but a big idea that is difficult to use as a rallying theme, as an exciting topic to cheer, rather to excite people. Now, we're not saying those ideas are not good. We're not saying they're not important. We're simply saying that those ideas are not necessarily winning ideas, in a sense that it is not easy to use what I just mentioned about John Delaney, that he wants to build a public and private international coalition against China's intellectual property theft. Now, this is noble. This is something that all candidates should look into as president of the United States, because it is no surprise, it is no news to anyone that China doesn't have any kind of regulation that would prevent business people, that would prevent other individuals from stealing aspect of what you call intellectual property. For instance, if you come with an idea and you set some sort of prototype and you go to China to look for labor help, before you know it, the same concept that you have will also be cloned, copycatted by Chinese companies. And the reason is because there is no law, there is no regulation in China. They can copy those things at will and compete with you, which means you would be losing money on your invention, on your intellectual property. So yes, obviously it is an important idea for the President of the United States to try to push and try to fight against this type of theft. Now, is it enough for John Delaney to excite the constituent? I don't know. So that's why we're watching John very closely to find how he's going to frame that kind of conversation in order to excite people to vote for him. Now, the reason it is important to take a look at that big idea is because as the race becomes more and more heated, meaning now candidates would have to start trying as best as possible to differentiate himself or herself from the others. That's when the big idea that you have, that's when the big idea becomes important. Now, would that be a major priority in the constituent mind? I don't know. Besides, John Delaney was not a name that people, especially people in politics, knew much about, for good reason. I mentioned earlier that John Delaney has been in politics for only 6 years, so he doesn't have really much exposure in politics. In business, I'm certain that the business community must know a lot about John Delaney, and the reason that I mentioned, I detailed earlier to you. Not only he built businesses that help other smaller businesses, his businesses were also on the stock market, so he was pretty he's pretty well versed in business, and he was pretty well known in the business community. But in politics, he's kind of a teenager. Well, not even that. I mean, 6 years is not a lot of time. It's not a lot of exposure that the individual has. So because of that, John will find that he will have some a lot of walking, a lot of talking to do in order to warm up the prospective constituent. Not just in the Democrat side, because despite the fact he had already crisscrossed Iowa, remember Iowa is the first place that gonna give what you would call the litmus test to find who's gonna be able to stick around and who would simply drop out, and that's gonna be the litmus test. Now everybody's waiting for the debate, the June debate, to figure out who has a chance, who doesn't. Now the debate will provide some sort of ideas. However, the very big litmus test will really be Iowa. That's where all those candidates gonna really find out whether they do have the strength, they have the support, and they can really get people to be excited about whatever big idea that they have. Now, John Delaney, as I just mentioned, in my suspicion, would have to quickly pivot on some other topic, because I'm not certain that in Iowa he can use going after China for stealing intellectual property as an exciting topic to try to get the Iowan to vote for him and get him to the next stage. But in politics, it is impossible to predict what can happen, what will happen. So John Delaney has as much possibility of making it to the finishing line as all other candidates in the Democrat side. John Delaney, as a congressman, when he represented the 6th District of Maryland, he did introduce a program called Open Our Democracy Act. Now, what was that? It was a legislation that he was hoping would put an end to gerrymandering and set an election day, presidential, and election day as a federal holiday. Now let's just quickly talk about what John Delaney was trying to introduce here. Gerrymandering is something that both Democrats and Republicans have been very active doing because it benefits them. It benefits, for instance, if you take any state or any city, for instance, gerrymandering, let's say for sake of argument that I'll take the city of Boston. Let's say for instance that Mattapan, Dorchester, Jamaica, Wilkes-Barre, Boston City itself, those are big cities in which when someone say Boston, for instance, it could be the city of Boston, or it could be the whole. I'm not sure if it's if Boston by itself is a county, but when you say Boston, if someone say I live in Boston, that doesn't give you that great idea as to where that person lives, because there are so many cities which fall under this banner of Boston. The city I just mentioned, Dorchester, Mattapan, Wilkes-Barre, Jamaica Plain, and even in Dorchester has five different zip code, and they have different sector of the population that live in those different sectors. So let's say for sake of argument that Boston City now has a population of, let's say, German, and the rest of the city has blacks, Hispanics, and different groups. Now someone, a Democrat, who want to win in the next election, realize that there are so many German in Boston City that unless that individual were to be able to harness those votes, that candidate is not gonna win. So what they would do is they would redraw the map of Boston, so that Boston City may not be included in it, because that individual figured that, well, you know, I'm with Boston City, I may not win Boston. So by redrawing the map and cut Boston City off that map, that gives that candidate a high possibility of winning Boston. So that's a form of gerrymandering. And again, both Democrats and Republicans have been doing that for the sole purpose of winning. In other words, although Boston City is annexed close to all those other cities that I just mentioned, but whoever would become the winner for Boston would not care about Boston City. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's what John Delaney was trying to put an end to. It's saying that let's not go about the remapping of the whole country just for the sake of winning, because why not try to cater to those constituents instead of trying to remap the county. Now, the second thing that he tried to put to do is to make certain that people have time to go vote, because as you know, the voting happen at a time when people go to work, are at work. So by making that day, that Tuesday, that fateful Tuesday, a federal holiday, it will give everyone that day not having to worry about rushing to work, but has the whole day to plan and go to vote. Both are great ideas, and I suspect both also would help to strengthen our democracy as well. Now, those are ideas that John can obviously use during debate and try to push those ideas. But again, I'm not certain that those are rallying themed ideas that would incite people to vote for John. Those are not ideas to be discarded, but they're not ideas that can get John to the next level. Ignorance, they say, is the biggest threat to any democracy. Indeed, it is. Plato, a Greek philosopher born in 427 BC, said that ignorance is the root and stem of all evil. Today, members in the Republican Party wear ignorance as a badge of honor, while the rest of the country watch powerless the destruction of a country which was once the envy of the world. The media is the enemy of the country, said Donald Trump. The Democrat legislators are obstructionists for not going along with everything the president wants. The Department of Justice is biased for investigating corruption in the Trump administration. This is the United States of America. Any question? Donald Trump is wrong to call the media the enemy of the people. Throughout history, dictators, authoritarians have always tried to delegitimize the media in order to get away with corruption, scandal, and yes, even abuse. Adolf Hitler did exactly the same thing in 1933, accusing the media of fabrication. Journalists are not in the business of fairness. Our business, our only business, is to be objective. It is our duty to hold Trump and every administration accountable. Today, it is urgent. It is necessary. It is critical. Our very freedom depends on it. A few days ago, last week to be exact, one of my viewing fan, suggests that I take a look at the gun tragedies that have plagued the United States of America. Today we introduce this topic, and we will put the blame squarely where it's at by continuing doing what we have been doing, which is resort to common sense. In 1999, that is a day or a year rather, when one of the what was considered then the worst school shooting massacre in the nation, Columbine. Since then, 193 schools have experienced school shooting. I grew up at a time when going to school was to learn. We never experienced those type of predicament. Those type of scenarios where you would go to school and you're afraid that at any point in time that something as tragic as losing your life is part of the equation. How does a society accept, condone, explain away the occurrences, the reoccurrences of those type of tragedy? It's almost like we become heartless, and the future generation, our children, becomes hopeless, that we as adults, instead of considering their lives precious, instead of doing the obvious to make certain that we protect the future generations, and it is not, yes, it seems as if it's politics. How do you explain that one political party? Now, I've been saying that, and I notice sometimes I don't know if what exactly individuals who are here in the country, whether they want the country, especially, and I'm going to say it, and I have too many proof talking to my Republican fellow countrymen as to the rationale that is used to explain away wrongdoing, to explain away callousness, to explain away indifference. Just a month ago in New Zealand, a gentleman opened fire into a group of civilians, killed 50. 1 month later, just 1 month, the parliament voted to ban automatic and semi-automatic weapons overwhelmingly. Only one individual, just one individual, voted not to. Translation: in New Zealand, they value people's lives. That's the translation. Because sales of weapons happen there too. Obviously, that's the reason civilians have weapons. Because they sell weapons. But after the tragedy happened, just a month, 30 days after the tragedy happened, the president of New Zealand condemned the act and asked for swift action to be done. Those legislators in New Zealand who represent the constituent made it their business to pass legislation to prevent that from ever happening again. Here in the United States, the first school massacre occurred in 1999. And since then, blood have been flowing in the hallways of our school ever since. Time and again and again and again, there is one political party that stands in the way of something being done. The Republican Party. They have all sort of argument. It's our Fourth Amendment right. We know that doesn't have anything to do with that. The National Rifle Association invests so much money in those individuals, those legislators. Your lives do not matter. And that's the reason 2 decades later, our children continue to be killed because the legislators say, well, that's the cost of business. I continue to get campaign finance money from NRA. I will continue to make certain no legislation slow down the sales of weapons. Because your lives have no value whatsoever. By the way, whether you're Democrat or Republican, it just doesn't matter to the Republican Party. The legislators in Washington. Remember yesterday I mentioned to you, anything that good for the people, Republicans will always oppose it. It is a guarantee. We have data of over a century, 100 years of Republican legislators opposing what's good for the constituent and passing legislation that benefit large corporations, no matter what the cost to the constituent. And by the way, it's not just to the Democrats, to all constituents. That's why it baffles me personally every time I talk to my fellow Republican to find out, how can you continue to support an individual whose only decision are to benefit themselves and to benefit large corporations that finance their campaign. But as far as you, the constituent, you're not the priority. If something happen that seems to be a benefit to you, it's always a byproduct. You are not the intended recipient of that benefit. Just recently, a $1.5 trillion were borrowed. Now, some Republicans that I converse with seem to think, great, we got a tax cut. As I just pointed out, the intended benefit was not you. And we know that because the legislation says so. We know that because the big portion of that $1.5 trillion tax cut went to the large corporation. You are just, whatever benefit you get, it's just an accident. You're not the intended recipient of those $1.5 trillion. Now, if you think you are because you see a $40 extra on your paycheck, you see a $60 extra on your paycheck, well, let me give you the bad news. You have to return that money. Remember I mentioned borrowed money. The $1.5 trillion were borrowed. When you borrow money, you have to return that money. So the 40, the 60, the $80 that you saw on your paycheck is not a gift. Now you may say, I don't care, but your children, your grandchildren will pay for it because that's not a gift. It was money that was borrowed. Now you may not care about your children and your grandchildren, and now that since I've been crisscrossing the country and talking to Republicans, I realize that there is no care anymore about future generations. They just don't care what happened to their children. And because of that, that's the reason that most Republicans are able to justify those kind of legislation, because as far as they're concerned, well, it's somebody else's problem. Well, that somebody else would be most likely your children, your grandchildren. Now, back to that example. So when that $1.5 trillion tax cut was passed, you're happy because you've seen an increase on your paycheck. Unfortunately, you have to return that back. But here is the part. When I say Republican legislators, anything that benefit the people, they stay away from. And if something harm people but good for corporation, that's what they embrace. We're talking about the gun problem in America. The $1.5 trillion tax cut, 83% of that went to large corporations and wealthy individuals. You get $40, $60, or $80 that you claim that's great news for you. Not only it has to be returned back, the 83 portion of that money that was borrowed that went to large corporation, you also have to pay that. Yes, you hear correctly. The legislators, Republican legislators exclusively, Democrats weren't involved. In fact, Democrats were completely against that. When they pass that legislation, they pass it in such a way that the corporation benefit of that money, but they don't have to return a single penny back. Who has to return that money? Because it was borrowed money. Someone has to pay it back. If you guess that's you, yes, it is you. We, the people, we, the constituent. Yes, you may not live long enough to be the person to return it, but your children, your grandchildren will have to return it. So no, it is not a damn liberal bashing Republican. Republicans for 100 years, everything that they do it to benefit large corporation, wealthy individual, because they only see the people that's going to finance their campaign, that's going to give them money so that they can do more mudslinging. Anything that's not good for those corporations, they're not going to do. As such, the gun manufacturers and RA are the organization that they protect. That's why we cannot have in the United States legislation that are passed in order to protect our children. Because Republicans say, I don't care how many are killed. Every time a massacre happens, rest assured you'll find all the Republican leaders come and say, our prayers and our thought goes to those people who are suffering today. And they've been saying that since Columbine. What can your prayers and your thought do to prevent that from happening? Your prayers and your thought are worthless, useless to people, to those children losing their lives. Why not follow the example? Why not follow the model of New Zealand? Massacre happened, 50 people died, 1 month later, ban on automatic and semi-automatic weapon. What's so difficult? Here in the United States, because your lives are not that precious, your lives are not that important. So why should you continue to support an individual, to support people who simply do not care about you? That's the part that's mind-boggling to me. That's impossible for me to comprehend, that no matter which example we take, and we will continue to bring you example after example after example to show you that your Republican legislators do not care an iota about what happened to you. If you benefit of anything, as I mentioned, it just happened to be an accident. Not because you were the intended recipient of that benefit. It is a guarantee, because 100 years cannot be a mistake. 100 years of Republicans doing things that are detrimental to their constituent. That cannot be an accident. Can it? A small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies presented to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore. I hope this presentation was of some use to you. We strive to bring topics of importance that impact our lives, that change our lives. And we try as best as possible to bring you some form of common sense into the process. Our objective is not a political party. Yes, it so happened that we do have a lot of data of the Republican Party completely oblivious what their primary responsibilities are. As such, it sounds or it seems as if bashing Republicans is what we do here. We are at a crossroad which clearly tells us that the country is in a predicament that could only have happened because the Republican Party had relinquished the legislative duty. We did not do that to the Republican Party. The Republican legislators decide to do it, to completely relinquish their duty, their legislative duty. The framers of the Constitution did not set our government the way that they did just for the sake of. It's because they care about the Republic and they want the Republic to be able to sustain all sort of attacks from foreign enemies, states or entities. But they never anticipate, they could never envision a situation, a predicament in which members of the legislative body would be an accomplice to that. Up to today, the Republican Party did 3 separate trips to Russia, and the country has no idea what those trips were about. Donald Trump had 5 separate meetings with Vladimir Putin, And up to today, the country has no idea what they talked about. Clearly, those cannot be situation, predicament that we think is okay. Clearly, it cannot be okay. If you are an American citizen, if you are a patriot, you cannot possibly condone those type of action and think this is just business as usual, because it is not. Our priority should be the United States of America, not a person, not a political party. And if you find yourself defending an individual, defending a political party against instead of the country, then you know you are part of the problem. You see, it is pretty obvious that I wasn't born in the United States of America. I became a citizen, and since then, I have embraced the United States as the sole place for me to care for and to defend. It is almost impossible for me to explain and express my anger whenever I see an American citizen do things that jeopardize the country. Such as when Mr. Trump went to meet with Vladimir Putin and bashing our institution while supporting an authoritarian. It is impossible for me to explain and express because it is irritating. Needless to mention how irritating it is to see day in, day out Republican legislators relinquishing their duty, their legislative duty, and becoming accomplices to protect an individual who is determined to destroy the fabric of our society. No, it is not normal, and it is not acceptable for any American to go along with an individual who decide to do things that put him above the law, to shred our Constitution. No, it is not okay for American citizens to cheer an individual who doesn't know the importance of the office he occupies. As such, the 2020 presidential election cannot be just another presidential election. It should be a time for all patriots, all American patriots, Democrat and Republican alike, to make the decision to make certain that Donald Trump is ousted from the Oval Office. This is not a Democrat and a Republican thing. It is an American thing. It is an American duty to make certain that we preserve the decency of the Oval Office. And the individual who occupies that office today should not have been there, is not worth being in that office. However, no matter what you think, no matter what you like about Donald Trump, he just doesn't deserve the office of the presidency. This is the first time in the history of the country that we have a president who makes lying to the American people a normal course of affair, who enlists everyone around him to help destroy the institutions, including the Department of Justice. If that doesn't make you feel bad, if that doesn't discourage you, if it is not disheartening to you, you are also part of the problem. It is my hope that you become more loyal to the country instead of to an individual or to a political party. If you have question, suggestion, criticism, do not hesitate to let us know. We'd like to improve what we do here. If you haven't followed us on Twitter, on Facebook, do so. We also encourage you to subscribe to the People Branch YouTube channel so we can send you an invite and let you know about activities on the 4th Branch front. Should you have a topic you would like us to research and talk about, we will do so. We will address it right here on the 4th Branch program, the place for common sense. In the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. See you next time. The 4th Branch podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the 4th Branch, live from New York. Good day.
kind of guy who will love you all over. And you're just the kind of girl who make love undercover. I'm just the kind of guy who will love you all over. And you're just the kind of girl who could watch me keel over.